Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're well. You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. Oh, it's Monday. It's Monday still. I hope you are all having a fantastic Monday so far, because this is video 2 of 2, and we're going to cover a couple of things in this video. But you're looking absolutely amazing, by the way. And let's get into the meat and potatoes. First thing we're going to talk about is Bryan Kohberger and this. Did he or didn't he search up about this crime before the 911 call was made? If you're questioning this, then you haven't really been paying attention. And this is something that we consistently see, and it's not just the how can I say, the guilters. With the pro burgers can do it as well, where they can ignore certain things. But I do feel that camp guilters is much worse for this. They're very willing to ignore evidence that supports a certain theory, and we're seeing that quite, how can I say, that's grown exponentially since this multiple perpetrator theory has been brought up with a degree of evidence to support, which, if you've got half a brain cell, I don't think anybody could rule out that this does indeed appear to be a crime that's more likely to have been carried out by more than one person. I think if one person did this crime, then I would struggle to believe that that person who did it, that was their first rodeo. I've always said that. But look, Bryan Kohberger has apparently, they've called out that he had searched about this crime, this murders, before the 911 call was made. Well, you've completely, I don't know whether you've forgotten or you're ignoring the fact that there was a lot of people who knew about this crime prior to the 911 call being made. There was a lot of people who knew. There was WSU Kim, who come out early and said that there was people who knew about this. They knew that something had happened. It was going around on Snapchat or Instagram. I believe Snapchat was the primary area where this was being discussed. Yes, they didn't know 100% what had happened in terms of how the victims had been or had ended up deceased. There was multiple stories, and this had even got as far as the Gonsalves family. They had spoken, I think it was Olivia, quite early on, that even they had known that something was off, again, at a time that preceded the 911 call. So, bearing in mind that Bryan Kohberger was part of the college community, not the University of Idaho, but a close by university in Washington, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Bryan Kohberger likely heard about this crime through the grapevine. The thing what I find really bizarre in all of this situation is that there is nothing that's leaked. Everybody, like people talk about, we talk about the frat boys, for instance, and could this have been a frat boy? Could that fight that at the frat house have spiraled out of control? Where it does have a lot of moving parts, and you kind of think to yourself, would everyone have stayed quiet? But everyone is fucking staying quiet. There is a lot of people who have stayed quiet already, because there has been no leak of any information whatsoever. And make no bones about it, this crime was being discussed on social media prior to that 911 call being made. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever. And I know there'll be people who argue that, but I won't believe it. There were people who knew that something had happened at this house prior to 911 being called. We've got evidence of a cleanup in the house, which suggests that people saw what they saw and then likely stepped in something they shouldn't have stepped in, and then likely tried to cover it up. So evidence of a cleanup. I don't believe it was the person who did it. I believe that this is cleaning up knowledge of what happened and knowing that you should have called 911. You didn't. And that could have potentially been used against you as a form of leverage. That's my thought process at the moment. But look, again, with respect to Bryan Kohberger, if he did indeed was searching up about this prior to it, then I would suggest that you do highly consider the fact that a lot of people knew about this crime prior to that 911 call. No, this wasn't about Bryan Kohberger trying to fucking Google what he'd done. I can't. Again, this comes down to stupidity, doesn't it? Was Bryan Kohberger that stupid? Which some people are going to turn around and say, yeah, he was stupid. His IQ is borderline high end, to say that he's rarely intelligent, and he's you have to consider that he did multiple things that actually would put him at the bottom end of that spectrum. But that's by and by. What I just want to make clear is, look, I believe that a lot of people knew about this crime. He was part of the student and campuses community, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that this had done the leap from University of Idaho to Washington. There were people who, who moved between the two campuses. There was a relationship between them, I'm sure. But anyway, the second thing that I want to speak about was something that I spoke about on the live yesterday, and I touched on it in a video that I did yesterday, which was someone had reached out to me referencing the Gonsalves family, and they'd spoken to someone on the Gonsalves family page, the Gonsalves army. They've sent me proof. I can't show it on the screen because if I show it on the screen, it's basically showing a private conversation. Now, the person who had the conversation has forwarded that to me and said, use it. They want to stay anonymous, which I appreciate. And also the response comes from what appears to be Christy Gonalves. And again, this is a private conversation, but I can, I've been sent it. I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but what I will say to you, and this is 100% accurate, 100% accurate, and that is that Christy Gonalves is having a conversation, and she certainly believes that Bryan Kohberger is involved in this crime. She believes it, and she's a mum who's lost a child. She's a mum who's lost a child. She believes Bryan Kohberger did it. I feel that she is ignoring a lot of information that's out there. Again, in order to place Bryan Kohberger at the scene of the crime, doing the crime, there is a lot of things that you have to ignore. And one of those things is the absence of evidence. It's like even going to the DNA. You have to accept the absence of the existence of the work that was the foundation for a result that nobody seems to be able to pinpoint on who actually said, yes, we've done this work and this work led to Bryan Kohberger. It would seem to suggest that the last people to touch that DNA was the FBI. But there are people like Riley Nolan who will turn around and say, but at no point did the FBI confirm that the DNA on the knife sheath was indeed Bryan Kohberger's. She actually states that. So look, there's a lot of absences, like the phone data. The phone data doesn't place Bryan Kohberger at the scene of the crime. The PCA does. That seems to, but then later on, after they've ruled the PCA as irrelevant, they seem to then suggest at no point did we suggest that the person, Bryan Kohberger, was at the scene of the crime. Well, you are, because you're saying that he did it. And we're also seeing a withholding of phone information. However you want to look at it, I know it's boring to keep going over the same thing repetitively, but they're withholding phone evidence. They're withholding the data. The data exists. You can get it. They have it, and they're not handing it over. Why is that? And that is something that I would want to question. We also have DNA at the crime scene that suggests that there is more than one person involved in this crime, but yet that seems to be being buried as well. And I believe that that is likely what the Gonsalves family are thinking. Now, they've, in this little conversation, Christy Gonalves turns around and says, look, we believe that there is multiple people involved based on what we know, what we've seen. But there's no proof to be able to go after somebody. Do you know what I mean? So we need to concentrate on one thing at a time. Let's get this person, get this done, and then we can shift focus and look at, the full story. And Steve Gonsalves is consistently alluding to, at a certain point, he will start discussing more and more. Which maybe it is. Maybe maybe they are on the same page with the fact that this does look like a multiple person crime, and are some of the elements that are trickling through in the documentation actually going to even further bolster that, like we spoke in the live yesterday about the cross contamination of DNA from wound to wound. And is there going to be a break in that link? Do you know what I mean? Is it going to be that they're going to go down the route of multiple weapons used because of that lack of cross-contamination between the deceased? And we have these odd statements like Xana and Ethan seemingly killed almost simultaneously. They use the verbiage at the same time in a certain way, which would suggest in my brain that they're saying that it was literally simultaneously. And again, because of the close proximity of where they were found, I'm guessing it was between Ethan and Xana, where there likely is no cross-contamination of DNA across the wound sites. That's how I'm reading that. I could be wrong. It's just me sort of trying to understand it, if you like. But yeah, I can confirm that this conversation, it seems legit, 100% legit, and it's Christy Gonalves conceding that this isn't just a one person who did this crime, that she believes that there is multiple perpetrators, but they are hell-bent on believing it's Bryan Kohberger. Which, again, I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with that for the aforementioned reasons. I believe that the absence of evidence is not evidence in itself, and I believe that there is discovery still being withheld. And some of the things that some people are taking as gospel, there is also missing particular elements of that as well, such as the workings out of the DNA. It's one of those trust us, bro, we got there, while simultaneously people not accepting responsibility for concluding that the DNA was Bryan Kohberger's. Everyone seems a bit standoffish with it. But if this is multiple people, multiple perpetrators, even if it's Bryan Kohberger, even if, you know, we're all just conspiracy theorists and the cell phone data isn't being hidden, it's going to show that he was there, but they feel that this is multiple people, then who makes the most sense? Who would have done this crime with Bryan Kohberger? Let me know down below who you think. And if it wasn't Bryan Kohberger and we're not tinfoil at people and we are absolutely bang on the money and things are being hidden and Bryan Kohberger is being used, he is a patsy for a crime to try and hide the you know, the identity of who really did this, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, and it's not the first time that law enforcement could have fucked something up. But if this is multiple perpetrators and not Bryan Kohberger, again, tell me down below who makes the most sense. What are we looking at if we're talking about multiple perpetrators and a clear wanting to hide who it is? Let me know down below. I'll catch you all tomorrow. Oh.